Hi,
Hi.
Adam.
Hi. How do you
We've
do?
met before. I think it was a number of years ago, and I'm trying to remember which film. I think it was the fiction film you did, the narrative.
Haditha.
Haditha,
Battle
which
of
I really
Haditha.
liked.
Yeah.
Which we met at Film Forum, and it was
Right.
you and I'm not going to remember, the soldier actor who...
Elliot.
Elliot. Are you still in touch with Elliot?
Yes, I am. I am, actually.
Are you?
He's not really acting anymore. He's...
Wasn't.
What? Yes, he's got, family and stuff now.
Yeah, one can get busy. Well, it's good he always seemed like a stand-up guy, as we say, But this is Tales of the Grim Sleeper.
Grim Sleeper, yeah.
Yeah, which I saw at the New York Film Festival, I guess the press screening, and you had Pam with you there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pam.
Who is, by the way,
Brooks,
one of the
main characters. Yeah.
Main characters in the film. And how was that? How was for her? I always imagine it's kind of a surreal thing for somebody who lives an entire several lives, even maybe like Pam. She lived quite a dramatic life, and then cleans up, I suppose, and then just happens through circumstances find herself one of the subjects of a documentary. This one about Lonnie Franklin, who was a serial killer in South Central L.A. She was able to help connect you with a lot of people that knew Lonnie really well. Right?
I think the thing with someone like Pam, Pam, we fortunately met just very early on in the film when we were starting.
Mm-hmm.
And she took us around the community and knew a lot of the women still working on the streets, many of whom sleeping pretty rough because they're on crack. And Pam was on crack too. She's now, I think, 4 years sober last week. And she was kind of our guide around South Central. I think it's been strange for her to be in the film, partly because I think everyone in the community suddenly imagines she's now getting lots of money, which of course is not the case. And Pam's problems of paying the rent every month are still there. And, one of the ironies is that we were able to worked with Pam for months and months and months. She was completely reliable, highly intelligent, wonderful human being. And she still can't get a decent job. And this is partly because she got a felony conviction for possession of crack. As you know, possession of cocaine has had a much lower sentence, but crack was all...
I understand. It was much more stigmatic, and it was something that the Republicans could grab onto and exploit people's fears about it, and then get.
It's exactly what happened, and then disenfranchise them. So a lot of the people, including Pam, don't have the vote. So one of the things we've been trying to do actually is to get Pam a regular income, and I think she's so charismatic. She obviously got through her crack addiction, and one of the problems is if there were at least some programs in South Central helping people get off crack addiction, Pam, I'm sure, would make a fantastic counselor. She's trained as a healthcare worker, but they're so badly paid that even though she's got 3 different jobs looking after people, she still barely can make the rent every month.
We call that being underemployed now. We have a term for it.
Yeah.
And it's a chronic problem. I understand it. And it's an interesting other point you made, which is the perception in our community that she probably got a bunch of money because it's Hollywood.
Yeah, it's Hollywood.
It's the furthest thing from Hollywood, of course. We know that, but most people don't.
But I think that's been quite difficult for Pam.
So it's kind of ostracized her a little bit?
Well, I wouldn't say ostracized her, and I don't think she's a strong person.
Right.
So I don't think she really cares. But
well, that's good.
I think, I'm sure her ex-husband, who probably likes to feel he controls her, has been a bit jealous and a bit difficult. And I think it's a community that is so ostracized from the rest of Los Angeles in a more or less an apartheid system that operates in Los Angeles that I think Pam is seen as somehow collaborating with the enemy a bit. She's dealing with white Los Angeles, and no one else in the community is, which is obviously a situation that shouldn't exist at all, but it does, and it's until it gets resolved in a kind of an efficient way, which is you obviously can't have a town functioning efficiently that has an apartheid system in it. But I think the exciting thing about the film is that we are starting discussions, using the film to start discussions between the community. Garcetti, the mayor, is going to see the film. Herb Wesson, the president of the council, is seeing the film. The LAPD all came and saw it. I'm not sure that there'll be an enormous change from within the LAPD, but I think there's a lot of pressure on people, the new mayor and so on, to be seen to be doing something, because there's more or less been a genocide there. There's probably between 400 and 500 women have disappeared over a 30-year period. No one knows where they are. And they were written off as sort of crack addicts and so on. But this is obviously a completely untenable situation. I mean, even in a banana republic, there would be eyebrows raised and so on. But this is in the center of Los Angeles. So I think people need to be seen to be doing something, people in power. And HBO are showing the film, which actually gives them all a bit of time to say, well, actually, we've started doing this and we're starting to do that. So we're using the film very much to start those discussions off.
It almost is getting a institutional distribution within of sorts within.
Yes.
Well, maybe it wasn't quite as planned out, or it wasn't part of your strategy, but it's a nice outcome. Certainly, if you can start the conversation, if not actually make some changes. It's a huge, as you said, endemic kind of issue.
Yeah.
The amount of this kind of entrenched institutional racism that goes on. I mean, one who is not that paranoid could argue that the crack epidemic was, if not created, it was certainly ignored at the very best.
Well, and it's gone on for a long time.
Yeah, and it's still. I think the perception is, that's not a problem. That's an 80s, 90s problem.
Yeah, and
but
of course
it's 30 years later.
It's continued on. I mean, there are obviously a lot of questions as to how the crack got into South Central.
Well, that's what
But the big problem has been that there has been no systematic approach to the community, which has been completely torn apart by this epidemic, which still rages in South Central. And it's been very much treated as an individual problem. Like, you have a problem because you're on crack, rather than actually everyone in your street and all the other streets around you is on crack. And there isn't a single family that hasn't lost a family member to it one way or another, or been torn apart by it. And it really needs a systematic approach to that.
Right. At what point do you say, okay, it's their fault. Now what? If that's what you need to say or believe, then fine. But then let's move on. Then it was still eating away at. Think of how much greater LA could be for everybody if some of these issues were.
Well, one of the ironies too is that if you have a felony conviction for possession of crack or crack addiction, you then aren't eligible for a number of the programs that will get you off crack. So it's a ridiculous catch-22 situation.
Right, but if you haven't been arrested for crack, you're fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so I was trying to, for a moment, when you talked about Pam's post-production life, post-film, and I was wondering, I think just having seen you speak a bunch over the years would naturally feel responsibility to remain in touch with, you mentioned even Elliot, but with Pam, whose circumstances are a bit much more, fragile. And so, because you kind of brought her into the car, for instance, and so she was visible to everybody. So I understand. So that's part of your commitment, right? And
I think,
but it's also must
a
be
real friendship developed between us, and her
and Barney too, right?
Yeah, Barney, my son, who shot the film. They have a very close relationship, probably closer than the relationship I have with Pam. I think Pam and Barney have a lot of fun. They're both mad backgammon players, and they can gamble over nothing. I mean, and of course they have an ongoing thing as to who cheated in what game. So they're as thick as thieves, the two of them, and have a delightful relationship. So I think that will continue on. And it's always been a joy to me making these documentaries, is that you meet amazing people that you wouldn't meet otherwise, and you have fantastic friendships with them that endure for years and years and years.
Even though the film, actually several of your films where you put yourself sort of in what appears to be peril, some peril or some level of tension anyway. There's some moments when you're approaching, for instance, getting back to the main subject of the film, which is the serial killer Lonnie Davis?
Lonnie Franklin.
Lonnie Franklin.
Yeah.
I don't want to say Lonnie Davis.
Don't
That's
worry about it.
somebody famous, I think, a singer.
Lonnie's safer.
Lonnie. Say Lonnie. And his son, whose name Christopher. At first, you build a tension there. You're not sure what Christopher's about. We see him from a distance. He's lurking in his backyard. The way the film is edited, until we actually sit and meet with, and even then, he's menacing. Let's face it. But we're not sure what his reaction. You're kind of there. You're within, let's say, gunfire range,
definitely.
And you also always remain very calm character throughout, as you do through a lot of the films where you do this. Maybe Biggie and Tupac, kind of thing. There's many others where you've done this. I mean, but maybe even Sarah Palin. You betcha you were around a lot of Tea Party folks, weren't you?
Yeah,
that could be
they
very
are enough to make you agitated, though.
You betcha. Yeah. I just posted another video, and I was in a group situation or something, and I had to play. It was a new Sarah Palin video, and they're horrifying and priceless. But anyway, my point, if there was one, your presentation of yourself it adds a little lightness to it, and a kind of almost a humor to it. Is that intentional? First of all, that here's this Englishman in South Central, kind of the fish out of water.
I think the role of the outsider is always potentially amusing, and I've always seen myself more as a Clouseau character, probably.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can bring in a humor because of your interaction with people, and you can bring their humanity out too, with your friendship with them, which I think is something that doesn't. Yeah. Is that you? I hope so.
Embarrassed. Yeah, I thought I'd turn that off.
Which doesn't happen without it. I think the challenge in documentary is to inform, but also entertain and have a gripping narrative. You need all those things, really. And sometimes it's useful to have me. There's not much of me really in this film because the people are so powerful and they're so articulate, and no one can state their case better than them. I think in films like Sarah Palin or some of the other ones I've done, where basically the central character doesn't want to cooperate with the film, doesn't want to be in the film, it's useful to have oneself in there as a device to tell a narrative. But it's much better if you don't have to, I think.
Also, I think over time, I mean, some of the lighter moments were with Pam and just how you played off each other, and you know, and that she seemed very, very engaged and amused by you and this budding friendship. So it's a nice thing to witness. Also,
yeah, I think
around a very disturbing story.
It's very,
yeah.
It was light and funny.
Did you, as you were watching it, what were you thinking as you were in the edit, maybe post-production, and you're watching this as maybe with a different perspective slightly?
I think in some of the earlier cuts, probably there wasn't so much of Pam. And I noticed that whenever there was Pam, particularly if I showed the film to people who weren't involved with it, they all just loved Pam. They all wanted more and more of Pam. Because I think, in a way, our relationship with Pam was kind of the relationship they could imagine having as well. So it was a way of them kind of getting into the film. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, some of the film is quite hard-hitting. It takes one into a area where a lot of people in Los Angeles haven't been and are frightened to go. And Pam is somebody who is so approachable and so has such a big heart and is such an optimistic person that she is completely engaging for an audience.
Yeah, I think one of the exciting things in the film was the stripping away of layers of defensiveness that we see with a number of the subjects in the film. There's three guys. They're very, very strong characters also. I mean, that's the beauty of it is the three of his neighbors who are very defensive initially. Right? And then we see what's beautiful is we can then identify with them. And, of course, that is also a very effective way of breaking down barriers and getting rid of that fear that you mentioned.
They, we called them the Three Stooges.
Yeah.
They were initially.
They know that?
Not necessarily. it was Steve, Richard, and Gary. And we met them on the first day of filming, and Steve had been calling me Peckerwood. And I guess it was pretty understandable. It was like all these sort of white film crews that come down there to ask questions about the worst thing that's ever happened in the street, which is about their friend Lonnie Franklin. And so they were defensive on his behalf. He was a very popular person in the neighborhood. He employed a lot of people in his sort of car business, one way or another, in an area where there were very few jobs. So they were quite loyal to Lonnie, and he also was the local fence who could get cheap washing machines and all that sort of thing. So initially they said, he's innocent. He's been painted as the grim sleeper by the press. This is inaccurate. We don't see this in him, and so on. They were very defensive. Mm-hmm. And then over the next few weeks, I think they all started, partly because of the film, examining their role and their friendship with Lonnie. And individually, they all came forward and said, well, maybe I remember this incident with him, or I remember seeing that. And they came up with these rather astonishing stories, which very much pointed to Lonnie Franklin's guilt. And also painted a very complicated portrait of a community that is so cut off from the rest of Los Angeles that there's really no trust, for example, with the police. The police are really perceived as the enemy who will arrest you, and even if you go to the police with information, they're more likely to use it against you and land you in trouble. And so I think although a lot of the people were aware of, and certainly Gary, Richard, and Steve were aware of things that weren't right about Lonnie, the last thing they would do is go to the police and say anything. Mm-hmm. And then you realize, too, that the police kind of not only dropped the ball, but had various slang words like NHI,
non-human involved.
Yeah, no human involved.
No human, which referred to prostitutes, gang members, and drug addicts. Whose bodies were found. They would just call them in as NHI, right?
Which meant that there wasn't really proper forensics and so on done on the bodies.
It must be quite a method too, on some darker or psychological level, for a police officer to dehumanize so many people. It makes it maybe easier to sort of get through the night. I sleep through the night. I don't know. I don't know.
I think from that point of view, it's like these people are constantly causing us trouble. We're arresting the same people week after week.
Well, they wouldn't have a job. they didn't have any problems.
Well, I guess
to deal with.
I think they see themselves as serving the tax-paying citizens and not these sort of people. And actually, when we met Lonnie Franklin's son, Christopher, one of the first things he said to us, just completely out of the blue, was, my father had a lot of fans in law enforcement, and when they heard I was his son, they would come up to me and say, wow, you're the son of the Grim Sleeper. Can we shake your hand? And there was a kind of feeling that Christopher said was that Lonnie was somehow helping them clean the streets with all the killings and murders that he'd done, which is kind of particularly horrifying.
If it's true, right? Because he might not be the best.
I absolutely believe Christopher. I don't think Christopher was even aware of the implications of what he was saying. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think he was just stating it. I don't think Christopher was trying to make a political point, because he doesn't have that kind of consciousness. He's not a political animal. He's somebody who lives in South Central and.
Right. No, I'm just thinking, it's not up to me to interpret it. I suppose it's taken at face value. So anyway, I guess to wrap up the synopsis, since we've kind of been leaking plot points throughout, but Lonnie had more murders than any other serial killer.
He's been charged with 20,
but he may be up to 100 or something,
well, they
or 200 or something. I don't know.
Pictures of 180 missing women.
Some of whom have been accounted for, but a lot of them are just on the streets and hard to find, right? So, but it's going to be a large number regardless.
Well, most of them have not been accounted for. And I think that there are probably, then of course there's the 20 on top of that who we know, or they found DNA specimens from Lonnie on their bodies. So, a conservative estimate is that there's sort of probably 150 women that might be attributed to Lonnie or going up. And those are just the ones that they found the photographs of. Right. And then, of course, Lonnie drove a garbage truck around, and the feeling is a lot of the bodies are in landfill. So it's a pretty amazing situation.
But even though it was mentioned that they might have been, many of them were prostitutes, they weren't all prostitutes. And even if that's beside the point, I suppose, anyways, because they're just people. Tales of the Grim Sleeper is going to be on HBO this late spring, early summer.
Late spring, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And are you based in the States and in the UK? How does that work?
I live in California and in the UK.
Okay.
So backwards and forwards. I mean, from the UK, but my eldest son went to school his mum is American. And I now
this is Joan Churchill?
Joan Churchill. And I now have a younger son of 2 who's going to school.
You do?
Yeah.
2 years old?
2 years old.
Okay. I won't ask how that happened.
It happened the normal way.
It's normal.
Part of the human reproductive system.
Yeah.
He's 2. He's called Charlie. And he lives and his mum live in California too. So I spent quite a lot of time there.
Yeah, I bet. Because it seems like your documentaries, anyway, are by and large take place in their American stories.
A lot of them are American stories, which actually I just, I did, the last one I did before this was a British story.
Which one was that?
It was called Sex, My British Job. And it was a sort of undercover film, which I wasn't that involved with, where a Chinese journalist called Xiao Hongpei went into a Chinese brothel in London and worked as a maid there for a few weeks and filmed it all with these sort of spy glasses.
Oh, okay.
It was kind of an exercise to see, what one could do. It was a bit of a failed film in some ways. I mean, Xiao had a kind of nervous breakdown while she was doing the film. So although that was very revealing, it was a very frustrating film to work on, for one reason or another.
They all seem to have that potential because
all the films do. Well, yes,
that's
do.
Part of the.
It's part of the documentary thing.
But that's part of your particular style and the method.
I guess so. Yes, I think what I love about documentary is that it is a voyage into the unknown, and it's about spontaneity, and it's about using kind of reality. The story that reality presents you is the film, rather than going in with a script and getting people to say what fits in with your thesis and script. I think that's a kind of very uninteresting use of the potential of documentary. And a lot of films now are made that way. Filmmakers research them exhaustively, and then they go and make that film. And I think part of the problem is that in these sort of pitch forums and stuff, you're expected to be able to talk about your 3-act structure and your resolution. Which I personally think in a documentary is ridiculous. But
there's no economy for very few filmmakers. There's no economy. It's not possible to go that more organic route where a film, let's say, could be 5 years. It could be 10 years. You don't know how the story's going to unfold, and you kind of might have to stick with the story. Now, I'm sure many of those filmmakers are also doing other projects or other jobs concurrently with that, but. So, I mean, there's no economic incentive to go on. But your films seem to run a couple of years, in between. And
normally quicker.
But could go.
Quicker.
Yeah.
This one was a couple of years, but most of them I've done within a year.
Right, which is not typical. I just want to mention also Frederick Wiseman, who I talked to recently, and I know is a hero of yours. But he when he did Law and Order, which was a documentary going back some time, I don't remember what exactly.
Which I've seen.
He tried to do that in L.A. first, and I guess because they didn't have a beat sidewalk, they didn't walk the street. They were completely in patrol cars, and he didn't want that. He wanted to be on the streets with the officers, so he abandoned L.A. and then he went to like Kansas City or somewhere, or Baltimore or something like that, where they said that he was free to they did have Street Beat, so he could walk around with him.
Fred Wiseman is an example of somebody who does one film a year.
Very true. Yeah, even if it's a few years in between.
High Water.
Did you see National Gallery yet?
Yes, I have.
Oh, you have?
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was beautiful, right? And you understand why they have to be as long as they are, too, because you can't really get what you get from the end of sitting there for 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours. But with seeing something in 80 minutes, for his thing, it just wouldn't work. You wouldn't get the sense of what he's doing. Well, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And I hope we could do it again, maybe in the spring or something when you're back or something.
That'd be great.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Very sorry again.
Oh, don't be sorry. That's fine.